Yeah. We got the notice.
All right, we're good to go. Well, welcome all to the July 13th meeting. I think last time we met, there was a strong desire to kind of do a June, July check-in, just to see where the cross insurance arena budget, the jail budget ended up as of June 30th of this year. And then kind of get a 6-month preview of how the general fund budget of 2022 is working out. All anticipation of giving you the knowledge going into September when we present you the 2023 budget. So I will stop there because we do have a chair. Dustin, you're still chair until you give it up. And so I'll pass the buck over to you, but I do want to introduce, Alex here in the office. Mike LeConte is joining us this evening. Mike is the general manager for the Cross Insurance Arena.
Hi, guys.
He will go through that process. And if I could ask, before I pass it on, Dustin, if we could take the jail budget presentation and the Cross Insurance Arena budget presentation, just flip them and let Mike present first, and we'll let him get on with his night. Be much appreciated. So Dustin, it's all yours. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's see if I can remember how to be a chair. First off, pleasure to be here, and love to open this Cumberland County Finance Committee meeting on Wednesday, July 13th at officially 5:35 p.m. I want to welcome, it looks like all returning folks. I know we got some few new faces, but all returning folks. And if anybody was up for re-election this year, we're welcome back. So if I'm not the only one, it's good to have everybody back. Let's do some introductions. We'll pass it around and just state your name and where you're representing from. Bob, we'll start with you.
I was recently reelected, and as people congratulated me, I said, well, win or lose, you could have congratulated me. Anyway, glad to be here. Oh, I'm from Cumberland.
Cumberland, yep. Jocelyn, go ahead.
Thanks, Dustin. Good to see you. My name's Jocelyn Layton. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I'm the District 1 City Councilor in South Portland.
Excellent, wonderful. Paul, go ahead.
I am Paul Turag, and I am from Bridgeton.
Oh. Lee, go ahead. I see you there.
Hey, I am Lee Pratt. I am the chair of the Gorham Town Council, and got reelected as well. So here I am for another 3 years.
Excellent. Welcome back. We'll do the other faces on the screen. Well, Steve, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Oh, you're muted. That's all right. It's been a while. Go right ahead.
I've been on Zoom all day here. Steve Gordon, I'm District 3 of the county, and I go from Harpswell down through Cumberland.
Glad to have you. Travis.
I am Travis tonight. I'm running off.
Oh, that? Okay.
Yeah.
You are
I
Travis.
had to log on using 2 computers as my laptop. I was telling Paul earlier, I had new internet service. And so bringing the laptop home, of course, it gave me fits logging onto the new service. So we're all good.
Cool. All right. And then Alex, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
Alex Kimball, Deputy Manager of Finance and Administration for County of Cumberland.
Excellent. And Mike, I didn't forget you, but I'll let you do introductions when we get to your piece of the agenda. Jim, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself too?
Jim Gailey, County Manager. Thank you, Dustin.
Yes. And I'm Dustin Ward, served New Gloucester, and yes, was just recently reelected. So 3 more years, here I am. You guys get all of me and then some. Jim, I want to check, is there any public comments that we have received?
We have not received any public comments.
Excellent. All right, we'll move on to the rest of our agenda, and then we'll start, as we had asked, to do the Cross Insurance Arena budget. Jim, I don't mind passing it to you if you want to give either Mike an introduction, or if Mike, you want to give the introduction, but Jim, I'll just pass to you and you can sort of set this up for us on this first part.
Great. I'd like to again introduce Michael Conte, the general manager of the Cross Insurance Arena. Mike took over the helm at the CIA. What was it? Maybe December, January of this year?
Yeah.
In that area. And so he grabbed a hold of the 21-22 budget midstream and has had a tremendously busy year at the arena, is now just breathing a little sigh of relief here the first month of July, or the first couple of weeks of July. So we have a presentation from Mike, twofold. One, Mike will go through where the 21-22 budget ended up. And unfortunately, we cannot provide you June numbers because those are still being worked out. So we have May numbers, but I think it will give you a good snapshot on how the year ended, and really compare it to how the budget was first approved back in May of 2021. There's a significant difference between what it was approved and where it came out. And Mike will talk a little bit about that. And then Mike will jump in and just present quickly the 22-23 budget that kicked off July 1st of this year. So let me see if I can share my screen. Mike, I'll kick it over to you, and let's keep our fingers crossed that I can get your stuff up here.
Thanks, Jim. If when you get to the scroll, can you go to the month ending May 31st, the financial statement? If we can get there. If not, I can just talk it through.
Can everyone see that?
You can.
All right. And
You
so, what page, Mike?
Keep going. Right there.
All right.
So again, I'm Mike Loconti, General Manager of the Cross Insurance Arena. I've been here full time for 7+ years, and I took over towards the end of last year as General Manager. Took over an interesting budget. Originally, we had projected almost $1 million loss because of the state of the state at the time, with shows ending, tours stopping, and no one going out in public. So we took over I took over at a weird time when we were starting to ramp back up full time. And we can talk about that a little bit more about how that experience was when we talk about the next budget that we built. But if you look at this page right here in front of you, really short. Jim, can you make it smaller so I can see the whole page by chance, please? Or bigger? Okay.
I don't know what I just did, but it went smaller.
That's perfect. No, go back. You had it perfect. Actually, if you can just scroll down a little bit so we can get the bottom part. Oh, up a little more, up a little more, other way,
Oh, I'm sorry.
down a little bit.
I'm seeing the full thing on my screen.
Yeah, I'm not on mine. There we go. So just in a nutshell, like this is how interesting it was of a year. So this is the month ending of May 31st, where we had budgeted an $86,000 loss at the time based on the volume that we were working on when we set the budget. But you flip the coin over to where we actually had for this month, post pandemic, we had 3 college graduations that brought in almost 20,000 people. We had a concert, Chicago. We had a metal show, Megadeth. We had 3 family shows of Trolls. We had a Broadway show, Blue Man Group. So, that's nothing we had planned for. So if you look at generated an income of $57,000 against a budgeted loss of $86,000. So the variance was $143,000 for the event spread that we had for this past May. In addition, you scroll, just look a little bit further down, you have the other income, which is sponsorships and Ticketmaster fees. That added another $48,000. Our direct expenses at the bottom, we had budgeted almost $195,000, but they were actually $171,000. So that was a variance in our favor of $23,000. So when you look at the net income loss for the entire month, it was an amazing month as far as production, as far as volume. We broke records in May. We actually had our highest per cap, which is concessions revenue per person that we've had at least in the 7 years I've been here. So it's a very different kind of event mix than what we had budgeted for. So it was a pretty awesome month of May. Jim, if we can scroll to the for the 11 months ending. Keep scrolling down. Yeah. Perfect. So this gives you a bigger picture of really how the year was through May. We had budgeted through that point of the month we just talked about a loss of 750,000, where we actually were at a point of 191,000 in the positive, which is a variance of $949,000. And that can be attributed to just the numerous amounts of shows that we got when folks went back on the road. We had unbudgeted rock shows, metal shows, country shows, family shows, and comedy shows that we were not expecting or had planned for. And when all these tours went back on the road, we couldn't keep up with the amount of shows that wanted to play here, which was an awesome problem to have. I would never complain about that. And we can talk a little bit about how like next year is looking compared to this, but I just wanted you to see where we were for the month as opposed to what we had budgeted originally and where we are now for the year as of the end of May. Another really good sheet to look at, if we can scroll, Jim, to the rolling forecast, please. Keep going. Right there. Yep. This will show you that if you look to the right, our original budget was a loss of 980,000. We've been in a great situation where we've brought in roughly the same amount of money, which would make us potentially break even for the year, which I know we haven't had in quite a while. So it was an anomaly of a year. I don't think we're going to see that again this next year. I mean, we had 4 large scale comedy shows and we've been averaging maybe less than 1 a year prior to. Of course, I'm going to go after every single one of them that I can if they make sense for the facility. But like I said, I couldn't have predicted the number of shows that came literally through the floodgates as the pandemic was starting to secede a little bit and folks are getting more comfortable coming outside. Jim, if we can go to the operating budget for next year, it's the one with the colors on it. Please.
Well, Jim's saying that, I'll respond to something Jocelyn said. I believe there was a concert this spring that set some per capita spending records. And I'm trying to remember which one it was.
Yeah, it was,
it really was off the charts.
Yeah, it might have been the what show was it? The Urban Show, I believe. We had a show that we normally don't get in this area, and I took a chance. And like you always take a chance. I book shows based on history, demographics, you know, the season or whatnot. And I booked an urban show, which was called the Hot Summer, Russ and Y&G, which really is more of these artists are more on social media. They're not like in my day growing up where they had 1 million record sales, right? They have 1 million downloads and they're very popular. Ended up being a really good show. We took a chance on it. The ticket sales were dynamite. And as Alex was just saying, the per caps were a record for us. I mean, for that kind of show, I was budgeting maybe $10 per person, and we topped out at about $24 a person, which was just unbelievable as far as the response from the crowd that was here.
Excellent.
If you look at,
Real quick, Steve has his hand up. And before I forget, is it Mike or Michael? Which do you prefer? I should have asked before.
Mike is fine.
Okay, just want to be respectful of you. But Steve, go ahead and have your hand up.
Yeah, Mike, are we having any interaction with the National Governors Association?
No, long story short, they have looked to us in the past before. My predecessors, the GMs before me, we had set up, and I believe this is what transpired, that we wanted to get paid to at least cover our costs, but it didn't work out that their budget fit with our budget. So I believe the city is probably giving them a better deal.
Why didn't that surprise me?
Good question, though. So if we look at the sheet that Jim was kind enough to pull up, just in a nutshell, just go to the bottom, and I'll explain this number in a moment. I have projected for this next fiscal year a loss of 512,000. hang on to that thought for one moment, because the loss of 500 is roughly $450,000 better than the last budget we passed. But I also went quite conservative. And I went conservative in a way where the last slide we're going to show you is our event spread. And this will explain to you why I'm projecting that particular dollar amount. Jim, the event spread with the 100 events on it, please. Please, kind sir. You're muted.
Let me see if I can find it on my desktop. I haven't opened it up yet.
Yeah, if not, I can walk the team through it, no problem. What he's looking for is the event spread. Now, we see that the loss of 512, I don't want a negative in any column. Obviously, my goal is to break even or pull a profit. Like, that has been a challenge for my last 3 predecessors before me, where they weren't able to accomplish that for a myriad of reasons. Nobody's fault, but the event mix falls into play. And what I'm doing is I went roughly, just to summarize, we've had some years where we've had 90 events. We've had some years where we've had 119 events. And it's not just, oh, awesome, thank you. It's not just based on the number of events, it's based on the quality of it. How many people showed up? What did they spend? How did I match up staffing against what was expected for the shows coming in? How much was the production? It goes on and on and on. So what I did is I took a number that I'm comfortable with. Now, I said we're going to have 100 events the next fiscal year. That's not guaranteed. A lot of these numbers that I have etched out in the certain months are pending. I'm hoping I get at least 100. I'm working on a bunch more. I was talking to Jim this morning, a couple of promoters that I have holds with, the different kind of shows that are coming down the pipe. So this particular event spread, like I said, it was fairly conservative. And if we maintain the numbers of staffing for our indirects, the cost for the shows, and the number of shows with average attendance, that would put us at about a $500,000 loss. My job, obviously, is I work very hard at trying to, I'm a real bottom line manager. When Jim and Alex hired me, they know kind of like what my business mind is. And really, it's the bottom line for me. And I don't want to see a negative 500,000 next year, but I had to put a budget into motion that would also protect me, because if we don't get a lot of these shows or something happens in the industry again, I don't want to start working against us. So I kind of went straight down the middle in a conservative nature, but I'm also aggressively trying to book much more than 100 shows. I'd love to get to 119, 124, and wipe out that deficit that I'm projecting and have it be, potentially a break even, if things work out for us. So that's where I'm at as far as the arena is right now, where we were last year, the hurdles that we jumped through to get to where we're at, to erase that $980,000 deficit, and what I'm starting with fresh going into the next year, post-pandemic. Let's see how it goes in the event industry and with fans coming to the arena.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mike. I have a couple questions, but I also want to open it up to others who have questions as well. So to the group, any questions for Mike at this time with the information you have before you?
Yeah, I just had 2 quick questions, and maybe it's not so much for Mike as Jim. Can you refresh my memory? It seemed like last year we had a discussion about the operating budget versus really kind of like the full picture of the cross insurance arena that included the management fee and the sort of, capital outlays, repayment of borrowing. I'm trying to recall where those items lie in this presentation.
Well, the capital outlay, that came through pretty skinny this year. The largest item on that will be taken care of by opera funds, and that is a digital marquee board on the outside of the arena that Mike is currently working with the city of Portland on. That will be not on onto the tax rate, it will be through our ARPA funds revenue loss.
Mhm.
The other items, I believe we had a new audio system being put into the arena at a tune around $80,000.
Mhm.
And then it was a third. What was the third, Mike?
Well, the Wi-Fi upgrade.
The Wi-Fi upgrade, which was about what, $20,000?
Yeah, roughly, yep.
So that's pretty much the capital that you did not see in the 2 or 3 pages that we popped up here. I will kick it over to Alex, and Alex can explain how we do the debt service associated with the arena.
Yeah, so what happens is this operating loss number gets fed into the overall cross-insurance arena that we present as part of the general fund budget. And the operating loss number, is just one of the numbers that goes into it. The other numbers are the existing debt service numbers, which are fixed in stone. I mean, it's not like there's going to be a change on those. And so when we go through the formal presentation of the budget, we'll put those numbers in there along with it. But it's very much this number plus debt service, plus another piece, which is really just the property casualty insurance. And those are the things that all go together to create the budget. But this is obviously by far the most variable of the pieces.
And this piece that we're looking at here does include the management fee, which I know we scrolled by at one point. So the numbers, I don't know, maybe you can go back to the numbers through May.
Yeah. The rolling forecast, I believe, had the management fee in there.
Yeah, it's right down there.
Yep.
Right, so that 202,000 is actually already in the net operating income of 191,278.
That dollar amount is in the trustees budget. The trustees budget is projected around $200,000 this year. I don't know whether this is a total management fee projected. That's a number that the director of finance at the arena has put together. That is not a number that has been hashed out between my office and Mike's office just yet.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Good questions. Appreciate them. Anybody else? Any other questions?
My hand waving it all here.
So, yes. Sorry, I got multiple things open here. I see you now. Now I see you.
Just a quick question, Alex. You mentioned property and casualty, and Cross Arena's got their name on the on the marquee there. Are we getting any discount on their fee? Are they writing the insurance, and are we leveraging that at all?
Yes and no. We're our insurance is through travelers when you get right down to it, right? It's Cross Insurance is serving as the pass through, and it's the
Right.
travelers company that really is truly our insurer. In terms of them hitting us with agent fees, no, they're not. I mean, we're getting some discount there. But honestly, the property and casualty insurance, for as large as the arena is not some gargantuan expense. It's very similar to what the town of Cumberland's used to be. And obviously there's a lot of liabilities out there for an arena like that, so it makes some sense.
All right.
Good question, Bob. Yeah. Mike, I had a question for you, and it's sort of going to be the reverse of probably what you get all the time. We know cost inflation, we know rising prices. I'm assuming you've built that in throughout. Can you tell me the places you haven't built in maybe a larger cost, and where you said, well, this year we're going to keep an eye on it, but we're assuming it's going to maintain? Is there any place where you say, well, we're going to keep it the same from last year, and we'll keep an eye on it, where you're sort of, have a little trepidation, but something that you'll keep your eye on? Because I'm assuming across the board, you've probably baked that in anyways.
Yeah, good, really good question. So for the most part, they have been impacted by, let's say, post-pandemic issues. For instance, for our event staff here, there's been 3 minimum wage increases in 2.5 years. That's gone up. Our cleaning costs have gone up almost double since COVID. So you go really our list of kind of like fixed expenses from top to bottom have been impacted by the pandemic, but I try to mitigate the best I can to not scare off shows that want to come, because basically I'll give a show an estimate today. It's roughly 40% more than what it was pre-pandemic. So what I have to do is show, okay, even though these have gone up, I'm going to try to save you money here. Maybe we don't need as many stage hands to build a stage. I can save you money there. So there's different ways I strategize and try to navigate those waters. So none of them have been like, oh my God, I'm not coming back because you're so expensive. They're all just like, oh, we expected that. We just didn't know what number we were looking at. So I try to balance that very carefully. I have to cover costs, right? Definitely. I'm not going to eat certain costs, right? But there are areas that I can impact to save them money as well. So it's kind of a across the board on that answer.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
The follow-up,
Yeah, go ahead.
a follow-up to that, you mentioned concessions. So are there areas that you can increase your profitability? What areas where are there opportunities to say, all right, I'm gonna raise the price of a bag of popcorn 10 cents or something like that? Are there other avenues to make things look better?
Yeah, absolutely. With anything with concessions, even that, we were talking about the list of fixed expenses, right? Concessions is variable, but the cost of food for any of our items, whether it's a higher end item or just the pizza dough, everything has gone up. We do work closely at putting percentages in places where the folks that are buying the food are going to cover that cost. So it's that's also a balancing act that we want to make sure that, we're not going backwards, and to hit these per caps, like I'll say $24 per cap. Well, that's the gross. What's the net? That's the real bottom line, right? So we're real careful with how we price the food, because we want to stay marketable. We want to stay fair to the families that come in, but we also, again, have to cover our cost of the increased food price and the increased labor cost. So yes is the answer to that question.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Any other questions for Mike?
Oops, I mean, I guess you already said it, Mike, but it seems like the number of events you clearly have been conservative on, right? Because I mean, you're really locked into hockey, graduation, and I'm guessing like the 7 Disney shows are pretty locked in. So, between those 3 items, that's half of the total events
Exactly.
for the entire year. So
Yep.
presumably you are likely not going to want to meet the 100. So it'd be fair to say it's a pretty conservative number. And I understand you don't want to overcommit, but
Yep, exactly. Like for instance, even the ones that are like repeat offenders that come back every year, like Disney. One year they had only 4 shows. So this past year I worked with those guys to make it an even more palatable deal. So they ended up doing 7 shows. So it's one of those things. Even if it's a repeat offender, there's a way to make it more profitable for the building. So that's what I work on, even with the guys that keep coming back. Look at last year with the Mariners. We had 3 playoff games, which we were not anticipating in the original budget, that were just through the roof. Let alone the excitement. It was, the money was good for those events as well, for both parties, the Mariners and for the arena. So it was pretty awesome. But probably about half of that event mix is kind of repeat and in the system. So it's it's the other 50 that we have to work hard for.
Good. Thanks, Paul. Good question, Paul. Any other questions?
Jocelyn had a question.
Yeah, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Dustin. Thanks, Mike. Thank you for that presentation. I just had a couple of questions about, do you have a cap of how many programs you do per year?
No,
No.
I haven't gotten to that point that would be able to, I think, warrant putting something that in place. I mean, I do have a staff that I have to take care of.
Mhm.
We only had about half of our staff when we came out of the pandemic, and thank God they're wonderful, they're loyal, they're hardworking, but they were also burnt out, after this last little run. So it's a balance for me. If I have to pull back on the throttle, I'll work with Jim on that. and just to see what's the correct strategy, because I never want to turn away business ever. So I just want to make sure I do that in a fashion where I'm also being cognizant of our staff.
Thank you for that. I run a small staff right behind you at Space Gallery. And I will say, this is more of a comment, but I saw that you had Megadeth, and I'm just curious how that went, because we had a metal show and they drank us at a House and Home. Like, we had nothing left. And they're so respectful too. They're just like coming in, doing their thing, and then they're out at the end of the night. They just vanish. And you're like, I'm not sure what happened, but I like it because they spent all kinds of money. So I'm sure the Megadeth show was good.
It was good. I mean, the beer lines were long, but there were no issues. There were no medical. There were maybe one scuffle, but we made them make peace. And it was not like the old days where there'd be fights all night. You know, I think everybody's kind of getting along a little bit better these days, knock on wood. So insane. They had their fair share of suds, and they bought a ton of merchandise. The merchandise line was the entire length of our Spring Street concourse, from the beginning of the first act until the end of the last act. So pretty awesome.
Excellent. Good. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, a question I have is kind of flip things around. Are there any issues which the communities can help you with?
Yeah, I mean, they can help with staffing, which they've already done. And I've actually been signing some more community events. We just brought on a real estate convention local, brought on another spin-a-thon from Jive. They generated 50 grand in cancer research funds last year. So yes is the answer. I lean on the community for help as far as staffing. And I also lean on the community for events that they never thought they might use the Cross Insurance Arena for. So I'm convincing them to use our facility. So on both fronts, yes.
And
Good
I'll
question.
just jump in. One thing that Mike has brought to the table is further diversifying the arena, in that one thing that we purchased back, I don't know, 6 months ago was a half house curtain. And so Mike is able to now create a very small atmosphere in a big arena by the use of this half house curtain that extends up into the stands. So the visual eyesight doesn't go down a bunch of empty seats. It stops at a nice big blue curtain. So Mike, if you want to talk about that a little bit, and also Comic-Con, because you were very excited on Comic-Con, and you gotta air that out.
I will, absolutely. First is the half house curtain. Jim's right, it'll develop a much more intimate atmosphere for the folks that come in, more of like a House of Blues engagement. I'm going to debut it for a show, Price is Right Live, where I'm not sure I could have got them without being able to ensure to the promoter that I can make our barn look like a House of Blues or a theater setting. So that's just an awesome negotiating tool. So we can go after those shows, because there's a ton of shows out there that are 1,500 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people that normally we wouldn't take in this facility. So that's this year, as Jim was saying, to diversify further into maybe some of the smaller shows like A Price is Right Live, which is selling unbelievably. I can't believe it. And other shows such as Maine Comic-Con, like Jim had just touched upon. We're diversifying the folks that we work with. They have we're huge in Bangor. It's just similar like the Comic-Con you see on E-Entertainment and all that. Whereas up there, they put through roughly 20,000 people in a weekend. They get special guests to come in. They have special musical guests. They have the cast from, say, like The Walking Dead, like cool stuff like that, where we never did that here. And when I talk to those guys, I'm like, why have you not considered Portland? The airport's right here. You can get higher quality and grade talent from the movies to shoot right in. And they're like, we don't know why we haven't, let's do it. So it's already on the books. It's already selling pretty well. It's going to be next spring. And, I can't guarantee 20,000 people, but I know the interest is really high for it. And for something like that in Portland, I'll eat my hat if we don't do a good job with that one. I think it's going to be a really good event for us.
I'm excited. Wow. We got to wait till next spring. I feel like, that's an eternity.
I know somebody. I might be able to get you in.
Okay. I knew I liked coming to these meetings.
Yeah. But, Jim has all my contact info, Alex does as well. If you guys think of questions after this meeting, don't be shy. I'm open to, texts, emails, phone calls, anytime. If you have a thought, an idea, a concern, don't be shy with that. Please reach out to me. I'll be happy to try to walk you through it and make things, more understandable.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, Mike, really appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much for the information.
My pleasure.
Really, great work. So thank you so much.
All right, guys. Jim, do I have your permission to carry on?
Yeah, go have supper.
I
Thanks for
will.
your time, Mike.
All right, guys. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, Jim, I'll kick it back over to you for second piece. Now we'll do jail budgets, unless there's any other additional pieces you want to follow up on cross insurance.
No, I think that was a well-presented item from Mike. It really gives you, I'm glad he was able to join us because Alex and I wouldn't have done it justice on explaining the nuts and bolts of how the cross insurance works internally. And so Mike did a great job. At this point, if it's all right, Dustin, I'd like to pass it over to Alex. Alex will give you a good understanding of where the jail budget landed as of June 30th of this year. And then we'll jump into what the budget looks like as of July 1st of this year. So Alex, I'll try to share my screen, give you a tool to go by.
Sure, and I'll wait to see what you pop up there and sort of talk accordingly. And I'll sort of start right in. Here comes a sort of a major attitude shift in many ways from what was occurring across insurance arena to these numbers. One of the things you're going to see in both this budget and next year's budget is, like cross insurance arena, you're going to see numbers deviating from budget and coming in under budget. But the reasons could not be possibly more different. What's occurring at the jail right now, the actual numbers you're seeing, and also what we're going to be talking about for the next year budgets are reflected of a jail that is not running at all normally right now. And I think we just need to be super clear about the different variables that are out there. It is running down. I think the latest number was we are down 60 corrections officers. Our inmate counts are down as well. We've had to send back some boarded inmates. I don't think we'll be taking that back on anytime soon. We've closed down the community corrections center originally due to COVID, but it hasn't been reopened really for two different reasons that I'll get back into when we go into the next year budget. So name a factor at that jail, and it's not really running the way you would normally expect a jail to work. So the first thing that I've got is I just pulled up a quick version of where roughly we think the jail is going to finish for the year. These numbers are not exact. June just closed up, stuff still filtering in. But what you're seeing here is, I'll go through it really quickly here. The wages line is a large chunk of the jail at any given point in time, a budget of around $15 million. You're seeing when you look at the wages, it coming in, no, that's not a typo, that far in under budget. And that is because there are shifts left and right that are currently not being filled, that would be filled if that jail was fully operational, if they were doing community corrections, if they were doing all of the programs, if they were doing and running like it would as normal. And in many ways, this is what's made this particular budget so difficult, because you always hear people say, oh, this has been a difficult budget. This one's difficult because it's running so differently from normal. And how do we manage both present day versus future budgets for that day when it hopefully returns to something resembling whatever the new normal is going to be? So you see that wages line came in way, way, way under. I did a quick summary of the operations and maintenance line, largely because you're seeing that it wasn't a giant variation relative to the large dollar amounts in there. Inmate medical went over a little bit. Some of food costs went over a little bit in spite of that reduced inmate count. One thing that they did, and I think it was a wise choice on their part, they had the combination of food prices going up on them, and it's definitely happening. But quite frankly, they were a little nicer on the food for inmates and staff, given the conditions that everyone was in. And I think that was fair, given what everyone down there is putting up with the past year. So that line came in relatively close to budget. What you see is that giant loss in that giant amount below budget on the expenses. If we go to the revenues, we'll see a similar story, but not as extreme. But you're definitely going to see a lot of line items deviating. I'm sure Jim's trying to get down to it just a little further. But basically what started to occur during the course of the year is you started to see the real impact, and this is going to reflect more in the next year's budget, of revenue lines starting to decrease as well due to these reduced inmate counts. You'll notice that the Marshal Service, which is the federal border inmates, came in just a little bit under budget. It came in a little bit under budget for the year, but it's trending very heavily under budget. It was trending over at about the 6-month mark and has been steadily declining with each passing month. And due to some events recently down there is probably going to nosedive further. INS is ICE inmates. That's dropped down to basically a zero. The only time you'll ever see an ICE inmate at the jail moving forward, to be honest, is if they're trying to separate inmates from their primary facility. And they've been very clear that they have zero intention unless it's an extreme case to do that. So that line's going to go down. The other counties line you'll also see came in close to normal, but again, that was basically a bunch of zeros through the second half of the year because the inmates we were housing at York County have all been sent back to York County because we did not have the staff to have those additional inmates in there. Similarly, the work release number, which was never a big revenue number, but it was a very important number because it was a component of community corrections. That's been a zero because for most of this past year, it's either been a lack of inmates available for work release or an inability to actually put them out on work release during COVID conditions. So that's why you see a hard zero at that number. So it doesn't print out all that well, but you'll see those numbers came in under budget. If Jim scrolls a little further, the next number down, tax cap number, of course, that's going to come in exactly on. That's, from the tax caps. You do see the Board of Corrections payments also came in a little under. That's something we actually knew was going to occur way back at the start of last year. That number is based on our percentage of overall state inmates. So when we budget 3.7 million, it's us expecting that Cumberland County's jails inmates are going to be 20%, give or take, literally a 1/10 of a percentage point of overall state inmates. Last year, it dropped down to, I believe, 18.7%. What it showed is we were more aggressive about getting our inmates out of the jail and not housing them at the jail than other counties were. We're going to know where we landed for the upcoming year literally any day now. And Jim and I are very much wondering where we're going to land because our inmate counts have continued to go down. What's occurring at the jail, and is that anyone that can possibly not be at that jail, if there is any opportunity, and that includes inmates who might otherwise have been housed at our community corrections facility, they're either being sent home or they're being sent home with a monitoring if at all possible. For most of the year, that was due to COVID, and on an ongoing basis, that's due to staffing issues. The net result of all of this is that you're going to see a very large gain in fund balance for the jail for the last year. The numbers are going to vary a little bit as the final numbers come in, but it's a gigantic number and the kind of a number that you would never, ever, ever under a normal operations see at a facility like this. These are not budgets that typically vary so much. And it's a real reflection of just how much things are running differently than normal. Did I miss anything, Jim? It's kind of a crazy presentation to give, I gotta say, folks. As I say some of these things, I'm like, I can't believe I'm even saying some of this, but that's how sort of wild things are.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Alex. I would only really pinpoint the whole U.S. Marshal Service revenue line. That's trending south as we've seen it lately, on top of where we're going to fall out in terms of percentage of inmates compared to other counties in the state. Those are two concerning revenue lines that I have moving forward. And we're only in the second week of the budget right now. So we're really going to be watching those two lines in the coming months because that could significantly alter this budget.
I also think where this year landed up is going to segue into why you see some of the numbers you do on the next year's budget. Because if you folks have looked at next year, you're going to see one line item in particular under the revenue that probably caused everyone to go, whoa, what are they doing? Seeing this, you're probably seeing a little more why we're doing it. But when we're ready, I'll sort of transition to over that and talk through sort of our thinking on the next year budget too.
Yeah, Bob, I saw that you had a question though, so go ahead. Yeah.
Just a quick question there, Alex. Are we seeing these trends statewide? Are you tracking these same numbers statewide, or are we an anomaly?
We're going to know the answer to that in about a week. Anecdotally, we are hearing that it's statewide, but anecdotally, I was hearing the same thing a year ago, that everyone else was sending home their inmates when COVID broke out. And then we got the actual numbers, and some of the counties, and if you think this through, that was FY 20/21. That was during a period where for 9 months, there was no vaccine, there was no nothing. And some of these counties had inmate populations increase during that period of time. So what occurs is the State Department of Corrections releases their numbers for the year that they've been collecting all year long. I've got an email out to them. They're usually very good. As soon as they got the numbers themselves, they'll hand it off to me, and we talk through what we're seeing. I'm happy to share it with you folks. It's a very interesting graph once we know it. But it's definitely a real case of showing how things are just the normalcy that used to exist, where we would be 20% of state inmates year in and year out. That changed. And I truly don't know what the answer is going to be. I do think some counties you're not going to see a decrease. Those are counties where the opioid epidemic continues to really rage out of control. Penobscot being a key one. They're having real issues there. Aroostook also is a place that's struggling. I don't expect to see their populations decline.
And a follow-up question, staffing, is that endemic statewide also?
Yes. I would say less so in some of the more depressed areas of the state where maybe the county jail is the largest employer in that region. But our comparison to our county to the south, York, they're down a significant number of staff too.
Bob, to that point, I was going to ask a similar question before we move on. I had in my notes that there was, at the time we talked about the budget late in October, there were 68 openings, 64 of those vacancies were in corrections. So Alex, are you saying that there's another 60, or we're down to, so they filled at least 4 of them, but there's still 60 open positions that they're trying to fill?
Yes, and to say some good news, the bleeding has mostly stopped. It is the people that we had in October and the people we have today. It's a lot of the same folks. There have not, those waves of people departing has slowed down to a trickle, and we are getting a steady trickle in. It's just, when you lose one person, or when maybe for every 3 people you gain, you lose 2, it is very slow going. But we are picking up a lot of steam there on the recruiting end. We are putting everything we've got into this, and we are making some progress. But it is a very, very, very slow process to hire a corrections officer.
Yeah. Steve, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I like to support what Alex is saying. Another hat that I wear is the president of the Maine County Commissioners Association, which we met today. And a similar conversation was being held. One of the things that surprised me is that we've got two counties that are beginning to negotiate with two other counties who actually have a combined jail, two bridges, about moving their facilities or combining their facilities. So we're seeing this across the state. Alex what he's putting forth, I think, is very appropriate. And I don't know how DOC is going to, the Department of Corrections is going to begin to handle this, but it's an issue that is statewide.
No, thanks, Steve. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and Jim put up sort of the crazy shift that occurred last year. Be very interesting to see what the next year looks like.
Any other questions before we move on? Yeah, that is a striking chart right there. All right, go ahead and move forward with your next piece, Alex.
Okay, so here goes. And by the way, when we get to the half year for the general fund, that's going to be nice and normal. So we've got that to look forward to. Okay. As a lead into this budget, because this is very much a budget where we are looking to get through this budget year in order to get to what's going to happen next year, because we are recognizing that there are some big changes coming. And what I'm just going to do is I'm going to list off the questions that are currently open as we go into this budget season. And it's a pretty wild list. First off is how much are state funding amounts going to change? We have a new LD1 in place and we have changes in jail population. So right out of the gate, we've got a big open question as to how much we're going to be getting from the state. The good news is we don't have to worry about them pulling the plug on funding altogether or anything like that. It's just going to be a how much question. A really big question out there, though, is when or if the Community Corrections Center reopens. And one of the reasons that this is becoming a very interesting question is when COVID hit, we clearly had to shut it down. We had to move everyone back into jail or send everyone home that we possibly could. One of the things that we found out after the fact on that is even before COVID hit, we were starting to increasingly have a hard time filling that space because we were being so aggressive at keeping either inmates out of the jail altogether or getting them out of the jail. Inmates who were post-sentencing, ready to be released and okay to go in that facility, were already getting to be few and far between. It's almost as if community corrections, which was the new great thing a decade ago, we may have moved past that world. It's a big open question, aside from the fact that we don't have staffing. There is also some talk with the state about them possibly leasing the space for a while until we can get reopened. So those are very big questions here about the Community Corrections Center that will impact the budget. But it is very interesting to think that, again, we may have moved to sort of a post state there. Will we continue to house federal inmates altogether, or will we see a reduction in them? There are some concerns that there will be a sharp reduction in federal inmates in the very near future. And that's due to the issues that the jail is having. There's definitely a concern about whether we'll ever be housing inmates from other counties again. You'll see in the present budget, we're not budgeting for them at all. And I think that that's fair. Will the population keep declining at the jail? Will it stabilize? Will it rise? How much success will we have in recruiting? And here's a big one that's kind of a crazy idea, but maybe not so crazy given what Commissioner Gordon just said. In a year from now, will we have combined with another jail? All that being said, 1 year from today, our population could be as low as 200 and as high as 500. That's the range we've got out there. And we're not saying it'll be 500 Cumberland County inmates, but there is a giant range of possibilities open at this jail at the present day. And so that's what we're up against. And so we're going to try to go through a budget here that's going to be mostly us doing our best shot at it, recognizing the extreme number of variables out there, and then taking our best stab at it and moving on from there. Also knowing that we have built up fund balance the prior year that we can fall back on. How'd I do, Jim? Did I go a little too wild there?
No, it was perfect, Alex.
Okay. So again, the next piece to this budget is the other tricky thing about this budget is we have to build a budget at least somewhat as if the jail is functioning normally, right? We have an obligation to budget like the jail is functioning normally, even though we know it's not right now. That's why you're seeing us not reduce this expense line. We're basically increasing it by the amounts listed in the contract. Clearly, we're not adding positions, but we're also not budgeting to remove those positions. Do we think we're going to hire 60 positions during the year? No, that's going to be pretty tough to do. Interestingly enough, though, if the jail get back to even 20 to 30, that revenue line overall would start looking pretty normal. You'd see overtime still going way over, but they'd start being able to add people back to the jail, add shifts, add programs and stuff like that. So that's the revenue line. That's why you see it not having a massive drop, because it would also cause a major problem down the road as the jail returns to normal operations. So that's part of why we've done what we've done there. When we get into operations and maintenance, this is the section of the jail that isn't actually deviating as much as one might think it is. And I'll really talk through the lines here that are having major shifts. First and foremost is that line called contract special services. That is our inmate medical. So that's the folks who are the nurses, the nurse staff, and the mental health staff who are in the jail every day working alongside the corrections officer. That number is going up next year. Should come as no surprise, wage increases. We've had to bump up their contract, I think 3 times in the past year to try to keep up with staffing issues and just try to keep a bare minimum of staff on hand. So that's why you see that number going up. Other changes, you're not seeing big changes one way or the other. One line that is going up a little bit is cleaning and sanitary. One thing that's definitely changed in spite of the fact that they have fewer inmates is they're going through a lot more cleaning products, and in particular, nitrile gloves. They're using those far more often than they did pre-COVID, and that adds up real fast. It never ceases to boggle my mind the number of invoices we pay for those gloves, but they're necessary. That and the masks that they're burning through all the time. Want to keep going, Jim?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
The contracted services, these are all subcontractors, I presume?
correct. Yep.
Is there, if you were trying to bring those staff in-house, is there just, they're not available, or the cost is prohibitive, or it's just something we wouldn't do?
It's something we know nothing about is the real problem.
Yep.
I mean, we have a county sheriff and we have a law enforcement group for whom, this is in their wheelhouse. This is something they know stuff about. So we'd have a hard time recruiting. We'd have a hard time really understanding the ins and outs of it. At present, we actually employ an outside contractor who comes in and essentially translates what Armor Medical is saying into our words. And when she comes in and meets with Jim and I, it's always a very fascinating conversation because, to be honest, to me, it really illustrates the full extent to which we've got to keep that separated, because it's just not an area of expertise that we've got. And it also helps to keep costs down because we go on a cost plus model. Basically what that means is if they come in under budget, we get that money back. The problem that's been occurring is due to the staffing costs, and interestingly enough, due to medication issues with our inmates, we haven't been coming in under budget. And that speaks back to something that I want to mention when it comes back to these numbers that you're seeing on the general expenses. While we are down in inmate counts, the inmates we've got are inmates who've got to be there it's also resulting in a very, very high percentage of our inmates needing either psych drugs or the ones that are the extremely expensive ones are
HIV, Hep B.
Hep B. There's the one. The Hep B is insane money. And because we are not, there's no insurance. The jail is its own true mini hospital. Every medication that it gives out, we're paying for directly. We're our own mini hospital health provider for them.
You're not tied into a pharmacy or any type of state funding mechanism for purchasing of drugs and pharmaceuticals?
One of the many reasons why it's really good to go with them. Armor Medical has a national contract that they employ. They are the nursing staffing for jails throughout the country. We're just one of their smaller ones. But that's, and they're an interesting group to deal with, I'll tell you that, because it's this whole separate industry that manages medical for jails around the country. But that's what that line item is, and it's been increasing the past few years.
Can I ask a question also before you go on?
Yeah,
Going back to the staffing, I almost hear you saying that you're using the budget and you're putting a number in there that you know is not really going to be the total for the staffing for the year, because the budget seems to be being used as a tool to authorize a number of positions. And it's in a way, it's like you have a budget number in there that immediately, if you were to do a financial projection, you'd have a different number in there. And I mean, is that how the control works? In other words, if you were to put in the budget what I'll call a financial projection, a more realistic projection of what you truly think full-time staffing is going to cost because you're going to have unfilled positions.
yeah.
Are you saying that would mean if you actually did get to the point where you needed to fill positions, you'd be constrained because the budget didn't have enough money in there?
If we went to our current projection of actual and then say decreased the budget down to that amount and then started hiring people back, then yes, we would have a problem. But no, under the current budget, the way it is currently set up, we do believe we will be fine if we find some way to start hiring people back left and right. And there is a bit of a hope that we can get a bit of a groundswell going. Yes.
But if we go back to that number that's in there for the full-time cost for staffing.
Yeah.
I mean, the 9.7 million, that's the budget number.
Yep.
I mean, just looking at the current staffing, and again, I don't know what the run rate was at the end of the year. I mean, I see the 7.2 for the full year.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to me from your discussion, it seems like that 9.7 million is, and maybe I'm not hearing you right, is almost as if those 60 positions were filled. And as sort of almost those 60 positions were filled, and maybe if those 60 positions were filled on July 1, were filled a couple of weeks ago, they would chew up 9.7 million for the full year. I'm not really, as a financial projection, I guess, maybe versus a budget, I'm not seeing how we're going to get to full-time wages and salary of 9.7 million from what you're saying.
And I'm going to agree with you. And that's what's so crazy about this discussion. And that's why this is a pretty wild discussion we're going to have here. Here's what I will say. The problem isn't so much the present day budget. The problem is creating cliffs down the road. Say, for example, we took this budget and we knocked it way back to the positions we thought we might fill for the current year and said, woohoo, this is great, we're gonna go way down. Then we actually start to have this jail start to run more normally. This committee the next year is going to be getting hit with budget increases that, quite frankly, the state law doesn't even allow us to have. So we've got this cliff problem going on. So we've got to try to think in terms of, we can't entirely abandon what we think this budget is going to be down the road. And this is hard because, right, I see what you're saying, of course, like the numbers are right there. One thing I will say, one of the things that occurs is if they get back to even say 30 down, what starts to occur is you start to be able to fill more shifts. You'll still have the wages full-time line go down, but you'll start to see that overtime line really spike up, and it starts to even those two out. But we're still a ways away from that. So that's the problem here. When we get down to it, I think you'll see where we're starting to try to account for that for a little bit though. I get the dilemma, and it's a real head scratcher with this budget. And it's why I found myself, Jim and I, really going back and forth on this a lot of the way, because yeah, you're seeing exactly what we're seeing. You know, it's how do we build a budget as if this jail is functioning normally when we know the jail is not functioning normally? That's what we're trying to work our head around here.
Well, and also we are restricted by state law on how much we can increase the budget on an annual basis. And if we ever if we created a hole for ourselves, we are then restricted on how much we can fill that hole on an annual basis, and we'll never get to what we need for funding. And I think Alex will go down into the revenues and talk a little bit about the hole that we have in the budget already that we needed to be creative and fill. So when we get into the revenue side of things, he'll talk about that.
And Alex, really quick. So you're building this budget with the hope. This is like the hopeful budget of 60 filled vacancies. Everything between overtime, health insurance, retirement is also built around 60 members, or a higher number, the 64-ish. Or is it around
60, because what's occurring is we're down on corrections officers. The more promotional positions, we do okay on. It's
Okay.
you know, we are fully staffed on sergeants, lieutenants, transport folks. It tends to be that basic position, because what occurs, to be honest, is if somebody more high up leaves, that position gets filled, and it's just the corrections officers where that tends to always be the shortage at the jail. Those promotional positions tend to stay filled up one way or the other.
Gotcha. Bob, yeah.
So one of the things that frustrates me, particularly 15 years on the school board and then on now the town council, is, you know, I talk about trying to develop a 3-year budget, you know, or at least have some longer term planning. So at some level, you know, and I appreciate Steve's comments there, but you know, I think that if we were to project a 3-year budget, the ups and downs would flatten out in a hurry. So I'm not as concerned about the 60 men down and that extra budget, but because I think it's somewhat prudent to say we there are unknowns, but if we carry a flat line, I think it will pay. It'll play out better.
Like I said, guys, this is probably the weirdest budget I've ever gone through, just because the conditions are so out there. But yes, can we go down to the revenues, and I think that'll help a little bit. So I'll talk through what we refer to as the non-tax revenues, and not surprising, you're seeing reductions across the board here. Marshal Service Feds, we went down by 100,000. Got to be honest, even from a couple of months ago now, we're starting to think that we probably should have gone down further. Work release remains down. I mentioned how ICE were taking down to really just this tiny, every once in a blue moon, somebody will come in. Same thing, obviously, the work release has gone away, and we're not getting any revenues from other county inmates because we do not anticipate that coming back on board. We're keeping the state DOC number flat from the prior year, assuming that we're going to get back to that 20%. We are putting in that tax cap increase. And then you're seeing that big old use of fund balance of roughly $700,000. That is because A, we know we've got it from the prior year. B, we know that there is a chance we'll probably come in under budget on this. We've got to be doing something there. Anytime you're making a use of fund balance, you're always worrying that you're creating a cliff. But in this particular case, due to built up fund balance, due to all of the changing conditions, that's why we're plugging in that very large use of fund balance number, because A, we'd be remiss if we didn't. I mean, we can't not do that. But if you go too big on that, again, you're creating a cliff on that front as well. So that's how we're getting this all to balance out. Personally, I think that the budget for this jail, when we're going through it in 9 months or so from now, I think just about everything's going to be on the table for change. We're either going to be putting in bigger numbers for a bigger regional jail, or we're going to be putting in smaller numbers, making peace with the jail simply functioning at a much smaller level, or we're actually going to be seeing a return to normalcy, and this isn't going to look that different one way or the other. But those are three widely varying outcomes that we've got in front of us at the moment. I'm sure there's going to be some questions.
Well, I'll just add just a clarifying question. Use of fund balance, you're saying that number is from just the prior year, or that is accrued from multiple years? You just happen at, that's the number we're at from last year.
Fund balance carries over year to year. It's use of county general fund balance.
Okay.
We know we got some excess. We know we can put it back in.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Other questions from folks?
So
Oh.
the jail is a cost center in the county. Is there ability to use monies elsewhere in the county budget, or are we locked in by state law to say that this money stays in this cost center?
Fund balance that this accrues goes into the overall county fund balance, but the jail does need to remain its own separate entity. We cannot, for example, take expenses from the general fund budget, say, put the whole HR department into the jail. We are, by statute, not allowed to do that according to the regulations that go into our state funding formula. And that is something some counties tried to do, to be perfectly blunt, and it did not work. So we do have to be very careful on that front. We cannot play that game.
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, and again, I think it goes back to my original question. It seems like what you're saying is that the budget tool, you have to be careful with that. You don't put in numbers this year that can strain you down the road. I guess my only suggestion would be that for management purposes and for sort of maybe more realistic purposes, you have this budget, but you sharpen your pencil and make really much more realistic assumptions on each line item where you really think they're going to be for the year, given that the year has I think it's already started. Just so you have something really better to track against than this budget that is kind of admittedly not realistic.
Here's what helps us a lot on that particular front, and it's one of the reasons. And if we can get to that place, we say this every year with this committee. I think you all would find a jail tour, if you haven't ever had one, absolutely fascinating. It is just a really, really interesting place to see, because I think one of the things, particularly if you're coming at us from a financial perspective, is it is geared so much towards daily routine, doing the same thing over and over again, keeping things as consistent as humanly possible. We view the pass down logs. Jim can speak to that. And so, yes, there's a lot of good controls in place, especially on not just the non-payroll end, but even on the payroll end. What governs what they do there is they have shifts that need to be filled, right? If they've got a pod with 50 inmates, person needs to be there 7 to 3, person needs to be there 3 to 11. There is no budget movement on that. There's no extra person, there's no not a person. It's just, it is what it is. So yes, there's sort of some built-in parts on there, but there's definitely us on our end keeping a very tight eye on it as well.
We can set up a jail tour for maybe a Saturday night. That would give some.
Oh.
Tour.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Clear my week to prepare, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Alex,
the jail themselves would be pretty upset at us if we did that to them.
if
That would
everybody
that
showed
would
up
be
on
mean.
Saturday.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Alex, one more question. Again, I don't want to be the use fund balance guy, but remind me, last year we didn't put it in as part of revenues. Is that correct? And if we didn't, how are you sort of comparing apples to oranges, given if we go down this road with this budget cycle, using that as part of revenue versus, I know you gave us June's numbers. It doesn't have sort of that revenue number. How are you just tracking that? And then do you know what that percentage shift when we get down the line to seeing the percentage change from last year to this year, that municipalities would have to go in, and what that percentage change of the new budget would be given that line? It must not be big, but I'm just curious, how does it change from last year to this year?
Well, actually, what that is for the municipalities. So we are pretty tightly constrained on how much of our overall general fund budget can get passed on as part of the property taxes for the municipalities. And that's that tax cap county taxes numbers you see there, which goes from that 14,765 to the 15,355. That's the 4% tax cap that we're allowed.
Okay.
We can't change from that. We can't go over that. So if we were to put in a 0 this year and then have it turn around and bite us in the following year where we had to raise taxes $1 million to make up for that, nope, can't do it. That's our big constraint. That's the state law. That's part of what goes into the state law. That also is part of why the state funds us. And this all goes back to a long story about a thing called the Board of Corrections that ran the jails for a bunch of years. But that's what that number is. So that's our fixed number that goes into the property taxes there.
Excellent. All right.
And that's the constraint for future years, is that hard cap. We can't have a 0 year followed by $1 million year. We just can't do it.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Other questions from folks? Well, I will say, yes, it is an odd conversation to have. There is highs, there is definitely lows. So, but I appreciate you sort of going through this with us and giving us sort of a peek into it. It's actually really good because it helps, I think, all of us prepare for that conversation we will eventually be having real soon. Yeah, any other pieces? I know we have other things in front of us. So did you want to go over those pieces, the budget summary for June?
Yeah, so this is something new. Again, this is the first time we've done a mid-month meeting. The sheet that I've got up in front of here, this is just the cover sheet that we use internally to keep an eye on things on the general fund side. So I'm sharing the cover sheet with you folks. And it's just our tool that we use, again, to keep an eye on where things are trending one way or the other. And so far, so good. The big numbers that I really tend to pay a lot of attention to is, obviously, I've got that target of us being at 50% or 50% through the year. But I also know that year over year, things don't go in that kind of an even fashion. So what I always try really hard to do, and the number that I pay the most attention to, honestly, is that departmental expenses. So that's that first punch of the line where it starts with EMA, ends with communications. And that's what I call the departmental expenses. Those are the ones that are where the payroll lines are occurring, where there is flexibility in terms of how much they spend or don't spend. Down below there, I have a bunch of numbers that are things like debt service, money that we've already pledged for grants, the salary term benefit line. That's part of that is actually the cross insurance arena amounts that we've budgeted. Basically, the lines that don't flow on a month-by-month basis, and also we don't have a lot of control over them. So I pay a lot of attention, and I'm sorry that when this copied, it didn't really print out very well. I compare that departmental number this year to the departmental number for the prior year. And I'm going to try to switch over to my copy of it because I did not anticipate that that was going to knock it out, because I know you can't see it. For the departmental expenses, I have us at about 46.2% for the year, as opposed to 43.5% for last year. That's fine, because 43.5 was us running very low a year ago as we were through COVID. As long as we're under 50, I'm happy, and I know that we're trending okay for the year. You'll also notice there aren't any real departments. Well, there's one department that I'll mention that's jumping out. You've got a few departments, a lot of departments trending either a little bit or a lot under. IT is trending over, but that's because they pay a giant fee for Spillman software, which runs everything from the first time a call comes into the dispatch center right through the duration of an inmate's stay at the jail, and pretty much everything in between. So it's a huge line item, get paid early in the year. So that's why you're seeing them at 57%. The garage at 86%, that's because we're putting in some actuals to prepare for the next year's budget. We've got a second operator that in the past was part of the facilities budget that we're putting into the jail budget this year. In the following year, you're going to see jail budget, the garage budget go up, and that facilities line a few lines down, which you'll see is trending over, come down. Obviously, the garage is a very small number. The facility is a much bigger number. That's why you're seeing that impact. So we know about that 84. We're actually doing that on purpose to get in some good numbers there. Sheriff admin, a tiny bit over. That's not a big concern. Law enforcement trending under. That's an interesting one. They are having some staffing issues. That's why they're trending down a little bit. But they haven't bought all their vehicles for the year yet. So that's what causes that number to come down. When the vehicles come in, that'll move it right up there. Not seeing too much. Finance goes high because we pay for Munis at the start of the year, and so on. So that's on the expense side. I'm not particularly concerned at the moment. I think we're doing fine. On the revenue side, there are certain numbers that we pay a lot of attention to. Some of these numbers have been pretty weird in the past few years. Some are returning to normal. The EMA number being so far down is not a concern. That's because we get our revenues for EMA as a reimbursement from FEMA, and it takes a while before they're coming in. Everything's paid in arrears. So at the start, really, for the first half of the year, that number always trends low and then plays catch up. A number I'm very happy to see is that district attorney's number. That is deferred dispositions being processed. That number really slowed to a crawl in the middle of COVID, and they're starting to dig their way back out again. Those are always good because that's always a person not in the jail. Anytime they're processing a deferred disposition, that's great. You're also seeing the garage doing great. We were a little concerned that as there was the exodus out of office areas, that would go down, but that's actually coming in pretty well over budget. A line that is trending down is Sheriff Civil. You're going to be hearing about that when we get into the budget process, because that's been trending under for a while, and we're going to need to make some changes. There is new legislation that may help that, and we'll have to wait and see if that's going to make a difference. Then comes the big one. Jim, can you switch over to the graph for this?
Ooh.
Oh, I threw a curve at him. All right, so one of the numbers that we pay a lot of attention to during the year, because it's one of our big variable numbers, is the registry of deeds. And as some explanation here, that pink line is the 5-year average from 2015 to 2020. And you can see the year typically starts off lighter, picks up steam as it goes along, and then as we head into the winter, it drops down. And that's really a reflection of real estate sales. So the more sales going on, the better that number does. When we went into the pandemic in 2020, the big fear for Jim and I was that our revenue flows at the deeds were going to drop down to practically nothing. Everything was going to go into shutdown. Oh my, here comes, the end of the world. Instead, everyone on the planet moved to the state of Maine. And that's why that purple number you're seeing there is crazy numbers, absolutely huge numbers that the Registry of Deeds pulled in 2021, way above average. So the big question for us after that year, which was completely anomalous, is what's going to happen next as things come back to normal? And this is very hot off the presses. I put this in, I think, yesterday. So we got some good news yesterday, because what we were seeing on that blue line in the middle there was it seemed like we were starting to trend back down towards that average, towards what we've budgeted in the past. And quite frankly, we were kind of expecting June to start to really level things right off. Instead, we got the same summer bump as past years. So we'll know a lot more in a couple of months, but it might be that there's a new normal at the Registry of Deeds that is just higher than the old number, simply because properties in the state of Maine are worth so much more than they were worth 2 years ago. Still processing this. We'll know a lot more in a couple of months as we get a couple of more big months in there. But it's good news, and it may certainly help next year's budget if this keeps on going and we can start to feel comfortable that that blue line represents more of a new normal, and we can start being a little less conservative on the deeds revenue. So that's a possible helpful thing right there. Any questions on that before we jump back? The only other revenue, communications pays on a contract basis. Those are the towns that are paying in. So there's nothing that deviates there. Another department that's really somewhat to our surprise going kind of nuts is probate. And that's births, deaths, probate, new Americans, passports, what have you. And that number trending so high is really a very interesting surprise for us. They are located right down the hall from Jim and I. We've definitely noticed a lot of traffic, but it's a surprise. That's not a number that deviates that much. So we're in the process of just trying to figure out, like, is that blips? But it's not looking like that. They keep trending above revenues. It's a good thing. It's just something we're keeping an eye on. So we're doing well on revenues compared to the prior year, even though we're not as crazy as Registry of Deeds it was last year. We're certainly not seeing the complete tanking of the market that I think people were concerned about either. So the answer for the current year is I think we're looking pretty good. I'm certainly not concerned that we're going to be heading into a negative fund balance for the year. Something's going to have to go pretty badly wrong for us to get there. We're pretty cautiously optimistic, which Bob probably would remember from me giving these same talks at the town of Cumberland. You're never going to get more than cautiously optimistic from me. But that's where we stand. That's the mid-year budget. I hope that's the right level of detail. There's obviously a lot more detail behind all of this, but then we'd be here all night. Questions?
Quick question. Remind me or say again, the Registry of Probate, what is that specific cover? You said a couple of things, but what does that all cover? What is usually in that?
Sure. So it's adoptions, it's probate and estates when after somebody dies, and the fees that are collected as they process an estate. And so those can be very small fees for small estates, or they can be very, very large fees when somebody with a giant estate dies. So it tends to be a somewhat variable number, but those things even out over time. There's passports. There's,
Changes.
yeah. So it's kind of, it's the life changes department.
Gotcha.
And the life changes department is very, very busy this year.
Is there any one that usually is larger than the others, or they're so varied that it's hard to even nail that down?
One moment, I went digging on this and
It's gotta
One
be the
moment.
states.
I'm going into my detail page. I have not seen a single line item in this department that is going out of whack. It's all doing about what it would normally do, ever so much more so. So the fees are above, the notices are above. Yeah, the notices are trending above, the forms are actually pretty normal, but it's really the probate fees. So I'm in conversations, and Jim and I are in conversations with probate to make sure that we're not dealing with a blip here, but the numbers are being too consistent month over month for me to think that.
Okay.
If this was a blip, I'd expect to see 50,000, 50,000, 50,000, to 150,000, back to 50,000, but I'm seeing very consistent numbers. So sometimes societal impacts after something like what we've all gone through the past years show up in funny ways. Maybe that's what's coming. I'm not.
So
We're still trying to get there.
it's sort of why I'm asking, is this another one of those? And I was just trying to get a little more insight, but yeah, I think this and a few others are impacted by what's happening day to day in the life of people, throughout the year. So this definitely is one. So that's why I was curious, because I think it will continue to sort of play that weird, everything's up, but life is doing something different than it normally did.
Well, and this is where what's occurring across the globe and what's occurring within the county start to have funny interplay. We know that for the past couple of years, the death rate in our nation has been above normal nationwide. And people can say it's not due to COVID or not, but really, past 2 years, death rate's been above normal. But Maine, because its death rate has not been as bad as the rest of the country, it's not like we're looking at a jump there that should cause such a significant jump here. Those two aren't really matching up, because that is sort of where I went. If more people are dying in this state than normal by some significant number, but it's not going to cause probate to be at 75% halfway through the year. I mean, we're not having those kind of changes. So,
Cool. Anybody else? Any other questions?
I'm good.
Good. Well, as always, Alex, appreciate the insight, the level of detail. This is actually just perfect for a mid-year, July type meeting. So I do appreciate that. Extremely helpful. I'm sure as more information comes in, you can feel free to let us know. I know you've got things happening within the week, right? There's a couple of things that are going to come in within the week. So if it's pertinent to what we need to know, I'm sure we're always happy to have it. Yeah. Jim, anything you wanted to add and follow up? I think the only other thing on the agenda, I think we covered the 6-month update, is the committee schedule. But before we get there, anything you wanted to add in terms of the update, where we're at, anything at all?
No, I think this is setting the table for a good jump off come September. Just for the committee's understanding, on August 8th, the county commissioners will be running their annual caucus to see whether there are additional individuals, elected individuals from towns who are interested in serving on the finance committee. So if there are, the August 8th meeting, they will appoint those individuals and they will be all sworn, ready to go right after Labor Day. And it's our hopes that since we have a good group already, and we'll add to it in the 1st of August, that we could probably start talking with the committee about scheduling up meetings 2nd, 3rd, 4th week of September and get the ball rolling there so that we don't drag it too far into the Thanksgiving and all. So we'll get ourselves plenty of time to review the upcoming budgets.
No, that sounds good. Yeah, I know we were really pushing there, but I think we all got our heads on a little bit better this year. So, and we've got our crew basically coming back, so I'm excited for that. Good. Any other things? Any other pieces, questions, anything that anybody has?
I will also share that we will really put some workload on you this fall, because as we explained last fall, we are transitioning to a fiscal year budget. So you'll be seeing a 6-month budget and a 12-month budget come before you this year. So there's going to be a lot of work on our part in trying to make sense of it all. But hopefully before you see it, everything's good to go. And Alex, do you have anything? I just saw your hand flash.
Yeah, there was a conversation Jim and I had, and I just wanted to mention it to you folks because we had an interesting discussion on, okay, do we present a full 6-month budget to you folks, start to finish by department, and then circle back around and do a 12-month budget? Or, and this is where we landed, when the departments come through and we go through department by department, we're going to go through and we're going to do the 6-month budget, and then we're going to do the 12-month budget. And then we're going to go to the next department, because it just seems like we're going to be recreating the wheel, and it's going to be even more of a killer from a time perspective as we go through that. It would, again, this is sort of uncharted territory for us, but that was just a procedural thing we were talking about, just as an FYI.
Okay, no, it's good to know. Good to know. All right, anything else? I appreciate that from all of you, and appreciate your hard work even through this summer. Like this is really great, and thank you for continuing to do the good work you guys are doing. So thank you. If nothing else, then I think we're ready to head on home, get supper, do what we need to do. I think we have quorum. There's technically 5 of us. 2 have departed, so we can take a motion to adjourn, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Robert,
Second.
all seconded. Seemed like that was the way it was going to go. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Oh,
It is unanimous. All right, everybody. We are adjourned out at 7:10. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Appreciate it.